Welcome. Today I've got Ian, developer over at the GeneratePress team. Ian, maybe you could give everybody kind of like your background and what actually you do over at GeneratePress.
Yeah, sure. So I've been doing WordPress development and all around web development things for over 10 years, almost 14 years now, totally. And I started working mainly on WordPress things, did a few other e-commerce platform things in between there, but it's largely been an emphasis on WordPress and then later React and then custom PHP applications and things. And I've worked in a bunch of agencies, large and small. The one that probably anyone's heard of, though, would be 10up, where I worked for a little while as a senior software engineer, senior front-end engineer there. And now I work on GeneratePress, working on all the products there. So GeneratePress, GenerateBlocks, GenerateCloud, all that stuff. And so I'm heavily involved with creating new features as well as working on existing ones, all those different things. We take a really cool collaborative approach there. Tom, the owner of the company, lead developer and stuff, he's one of those guys that really just loves to work on cool things, and he wants to, come to a good idea and the best possible idea, best reasonable idea we can do, rather than just what's something we can sell or something we can market. And in the process of making stuff that's cool and useful, he found something that people wanted to buy, and it's really nice to be a part of that. I get to do a little bit with the support forums here and there, which I actually kind of like because I have a support background. I used to do that a lot before I got multi-channel support before I ever got into web dev. So it's nice. I kind of get to do all kinds of things, but it's all really fun stuff, really cool stuff.
Like, how do you describe GeneratePress and GenerateBlocks specifically? Like, do you guys use the term page builder, or do you have like a specific term for like how you describe like what kind of the core offering is?
I mean, I think that maybe some people might answer that question a little bit differently than others, but like for me, it's like the page builder part. I mean, we don't have our own page builder. We're we're like a blocks plugin, so we add blocks to the editor, or we add controls to the native WordPress options. But it's an all-in-one solution for building WordPress sites as close to core as you probably reasonably want to. Is a good way that I would.
Okay.
We try to leverage a lot of the core mechanisms in what we build, and then where we need to color outside the lines or kind of add a little bit more to bridge a gap or make things easier for people or what have you, then that's where we go.
What do you think was like the decision to go all in on blocks versus say like make your own page builder?
That's a good question. I think Tom would probably be a little bit better suited to answer than me, but I think that the thing that attracted me the most to that idea myself was we're making something that has a lot better interop with other things. So you can have other blocks, things that play nicely with our things, instead of having to say, well, you have to go really all in on this one ecosystem to be able to leverage the stuff that we have. I think that's probably the biggest overall benefit of that decision. As far as why, though, I mean, that's more of a Tom question.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's like kind of the value of the block editor, where you look at every plugin and then they're like, okay, now we have Elementor compatibility, Beaver Builder compatibility. Like they have to build their like compatibility for every single thing, or they have to use like legacy shortcodes. And then once you're in like the blocks world, you're like, oh, this plugin has a block, this plugin has a block. I can use, you guys have a lot of like structural blocks, right? Like things that are more for layout and stuff like that, but you could bring in some forms plugins. It just feels like it's a better place where things kind of commingle a little bit.
Yeah, right. And, one of the things that is key about all of our offerings right now, like the GeneratePress stuff, you have all these cool pro features. Those are all modules you can turn on and off. So it's kind of designed to be like use as much or as little of it as you want. And I think that's really nice when you're talking about playing with other things. So then you can say, well, I want to use these generate blocks to lay out this section, and I want to use these for styling. But then this one thing over here, I want to do this way with it. And there's a lot of flexibility of approach there, but not so much where it's like, which thing do I do? It's more like there are easy options, reasonable escape hatches, ways to color outside the lines safely as far as it goes.
When you're like thinking about who's going to use it, do you feel like you have developers who are maybe more WordPress code knowledgeable? Maybe they understand like WP query, things like that. Or do you have people who are more focused on just like the visual aspect of like building out a page or something like that? Do you guys have like a specific niche?
I think that in general, the vast majority of people, and this is kind of like inescapable for a product that has this many users anyway, but like, yeah, the vast majority would be like more like low or no code types of folks, I would say, or at least that's the way that it usually ends up being used. Like there's sites that I build with this stuff where I don't need to do a bunch of heavy developer things. Like I maybe use a little bit of extra CSS here or there, a couple filters here or there, but it's all really basic stuff compared to the type of custom theme development things that I've had to do most of my career. I think that in general, those folks, like many things, like when you read GitHub issues and support forums that are more technical topics, you usually get those technical people or people who aren't scared of those things coming out. And it feels like these are the only people I hear from. That's because those other people just don't reach out that way, or they don't reach out at all, or they say, no, I'm going to try this other tool. But yeah, I think first and foremost, when we make these things, we try to optimize for what is the most reasonable, what's going to take care of the most people's needs here. What are most people really wanting? Most people don't necessarily, and this even goes for developers. Not every developer understands how grid template columns works, or how, these various, which font thing do I choose, or whatever. Some of this is unavoidable where you got to kind of learn it to really understand, but some of this is like, just make it easy for me. And even for people like us, man, like if you can just click a button and it does what you know it to do, then great, right? That's easier for everybody. But yeah, we try to optimize, I think, for the non-power user first, while in the process, though, we still make some pretty sweet power user features too, right? So I think it's a good framing.
And it's an interesting thing because you come from an agency background where I'm sure you built a lot of really complicated custom stuff. Even just to build something like GenerateBlocks, you have to have some pretty deep React knowledge. You have to really understand all of that sort of stuff. And I feel like there's always this gap between the skills you have to really do these power user things, and then who I think WordPress is always trying to appeal to, which, like you said, is like the no code or low code user. So like, do you have to like context shift at all when you're thinking like, man, I know I gotta dig deep into this crazy React stuff to like build out what I'm trying to make happen, and at the same time, like you said, like translate it to just feel intuitive to somebody who doesn't really know or care what's under the hood?
Yeah, and it's tough sometimes when you have to do this really complex technical implementation for something, and then it turns out that, well, you actually just overcomplicated this whole thing in the process. And maybe it still is complicated, but it's not that complicated in that sort of way. And that's that becomes a little tricky at times with the editor itself, because sometimes there's an update and something changes, and so now you have this non-experimental API that was experimental before, and now you have to kind of make these other changes and adjustments. So yeah, sometimes it can be, but we try to we try to heavily test these things just like ourselves, and we have a lot of non-developer folks that we work with on the team in various roles who we have, and we're like, hey man, come take a look at this, or hey, can you give us your feedback on this thing and whatever, and then combine that with like beta and alpha testing. And we usually seem to do, I think, okay on that. Like I don't think there's been an enormous miss that I can think of where it was like, wow, we really massively overcomplicated that whole thing. But there was definitely some fun technical challenges that have been solved, like some crazy stuff that we've had to write that just to make really simple yet powerful features.
Yeah, look, one of the big changes it feels like recently is a lot of people really want like class-based styling. They really want like more robust, obviously responsive controls, all these sorts of things. These are like things that you are working on implementing, things that people say like, oh, I wish the block editor did this. But I have to imagine you've maybe learned like just how hard it is to, like, it's easy to say this is what I want, but to actually make it happen, has it been hard to get those sort of like advanced tools?
I mean, I think that it's interesting. Probably 80% of most of the really good ideas that we have, like the 80% of the idea as a whole, that part happens pretty quick, right? Like sometimes Tom will come back to me and say, wow, like, check out this thing I just did over the weekend. I don't know if it seems like it was almost too straightforward. And I'm like, no, I think it's exactly straightforward enough, right? Like, this is amazing. And sometimes those things can fall into place pretty quickly, but A lot of it comes down to you really have to commit to making decisions. You have to make a decision about things, like say with the block attributes, when we were coming up with this concept for the styles, all those styles live inside a single styles attribute. So we don't have to add like an attribute for every single CSS property or something, right? Just a nightmare from a maintenance perspective. But it's like, if that's what you're going to do, now you have to lean into that and you really have to start doing things a certain way. With the block editor, there's not always an easy way to say, oh, everybody needs to do it exactly one way or the other, like static or dynamic blocks, or do you use like these kind of more object-driven attributes, or do you have them enumerated more specifically? Whatever. So, yeah, I mean, there's definitely a challenge there. I think there's a bigger challenge when you're building a product like Gutenberg because you have to sort of appeal to all the possible options. And I think that's kind of part of the reason why a lot of the I hesitate to say the word like narrative, but like the things that I've been hearing the people in the dev team say tend to skew more towards like, we need to get more opinionated about some of this stuff so we can make more of these decisions, right? Like, yeah, so I appreciate the complexity that comes with that for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, there's also I would say like a narrative in the community that it's really hard to extend the block editor, but obviously you guys are doing it. So, I mean, do you think it's gotten easier? Do you feel like there's like a path towards it? Or is it just because you've staked out like a larger domain where you can say like, well, no, this is a custom block. So now we can do whatever we want, or we have our own styling engine so we can do whatever we want. Like, how has that extensibility happened?
Yeah, I mean, like the core, it's interesting because when we first came up with this whole idea, Tom had this notion of wanting to do the blocks a certain way, which we tried to do, and I won't get it. It'll be too much to details wise to get into, but we had to sort of go back to the drawing board one or two times, but we ended up landing on this concept of having a couple core blocks that we then make variations of, right? And a variation, for the benefit of anybody watching, a block variation is essentially just a combination of attributes associated with a given block, right? So you say if this block has all of these things set, or this thing set, that makes it a whatever block or something, say a text block versus a button block. Those were both the same core block under their hood. They're just variations in things like that. And I think that having more of a sort of flexible approach where we have something like that, or like a styles object that then just all the styles are in there, it makes it way easier because then we can create a new block and we can apply our styling engine to it and boom, it just works. Global styles, they just work. We get a few HOCs, we line them all up, and everything just kind of jams. And if you really build things in a way that's designed to be fundamentally pluggable, I think you're going to have a better time of it anyway. It doesn't mean that everything's simple, though, because like variations aren't actually blocks. So you can't do certain things that are like, say, you can't limit them in the inserter the same way as just regular blocks could. That's why we had to make certain blocks like the loop item or other things like that. Which seems kind of weird if you say, well, you have these like the element and the text block and you use those to make all these. Well, sometimes you have to do something different. But I think that's probably the biggest thing I've seen go wrong with most people's implementations of these things. Is like if they're doing an extending project to extend the editor, they'll get it in their head that they have to do it in this one very specific manner. And so then they'll do it that way, even if it is kind of like rough in these other areas. Or they just kind of abandon the project and like the notion of doing it all a certain way at all. And then everything's just kind of spaghetti. And in both of those types of cases, you're in for a bad time, right? Like you got to kind of look at this and say, I don't think that this is exactly right here, but we can do this thing differently over here because it's for a really good reason. It actually makes a lot of sense. And I think that's made some of these things a little bit easier. Lean into the core features. Do it this way as much as you can. Color outside the lines just where you need to.
Yeah, I was over the holiday break, I was experimenting with building a plugin for something in the block editor where I was like, I really want this feature, doesn't exist. I'll see if I can build it for fun. And I was really struggling with a few things. And one of them, like you said, was that idea of like there's 3 different ways to build it. And I keep trying each different one and you're like losing sort of the overall picture. And then, so I had like all these branches of like, try this, try that, delete everything and redo it. But the one thing that really tripped me up the most was that I hit a point where what I was trying to build was not going to really be valuable if you couldn't have some sort of a responsive control to it. Like you couldn't have different styles on desktop and mobile. That was like one of the key things that this feature I'm trying to build needs. And then I sat there and I thought, well, that's not in core. If they're just using a simple core theme like 2024, then I have to build this all from scratch. If they're using another plugin that has responsive controls, now I have duplicate responsive controls. There's not like an abstract library I can pull in that comes from core and stuff like that. And I don't know, I might even abandon it. Like I hit a point where I was like, it seems like a problem that is insurmountable. Did you ever hit like problems like that where you're just like, this is just such a thing that like, if we do it our own weird way, it's just going to cause problems for any other integrations? Or is it kind of fine because you are the sort of base level integration for them?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we don't really go out of our way to make sure our plugin plays nice with every other plugin there is, of course, or things like that. But we also go out of our way to make sure that it's not unnecessarily like hard coded or static in certain ways. Mm-hmm. Like trying to, like, as an example, if we're going to get the WordPress excerpt or something, we'll apply the filters that would normally be used there and things like that. Yeah. To try to make things as smooth as possible, with the notion being like it should try to be as unhacky as it can be. So that way it does play nicer with other stuff. Like I think in a way doing that is almost more valuable than like trying to do a bunch of really meticulous research, unless you're building like an integration of some sort, right? Like a good example of that in that last part would be like this thing we did with the dynamic tags, where in Pro we have an ACF integration. Mm-hmm. Now, in the free version, it'll still list the ACF fields because they're all post meta, but it just won't like put them in a certain order and make them all nice in the editor, so it's more clear like which ones you probably want to choose and things like that, right? So we wrote that specifically with ACF compatibility in mind. It uses like these ACF methods to tell if it's actually an ACF field or not, and things like that. There's a way to even modify that process if you're using like an ACF custom table plugin or something, actual thing that we were asked about, that where it's like not stored in post meta at all. It's flexible enough to support all of those types of use cases, just because we're again trying to keep it simple, use as many like reasonable kind of core things first, and then where we can appropriately add filters and things like that. Trying to document a lot of those as we go too.
Yeah, ACF is actually a really good example of that, because I've been really interested in the block bindings API in core, which is this idea that they're going to start bringing custom fields and meta and stuff into like a more dynamic experience and stuff. But ACF isn't going to work with it, out of the box, because ACF has to do things a little differently when they register meta, for example. So like, ACF, like custom fields registered in ACF aren't quite like the same as like regular custom fields, because they needed to make it more powerful and they needed to go a different route and stuff. And now as it like comes back around, it's like, okay, well then that's, I guess, going to just be on ACF's team to build that sort of integration. And I guess that's like your sort of responsibility too. I guess if ACF's that big of a player, you guys kind of have to at some level work with it, because otherwise why would people, want to use your plugin?
Yeah, absolutely. And in this case, I think our integration for doing dynamic post meta things and ACF things like that, where you're not just like, where you're actually using them in the editor and stuff, it's pretty top tier. I don't know every other plugin out there. There's probably going to be someone that goes, hey man, this other thing. I'm sure there's other things out there that might do something similar, but ours is pretty sick. Like when you say, I want a post meta key, it doesn't matter where that thing comes from. Mm-hmm. It could be any post meta key that you could possibly think of. If it's a real post meta key that is available for that thing, you can do stuff to it. Additionally, even if that key is an object or an array of key data, you can still access all of it too using a dot notation syntax. So if you have like an ACF image field that returns as an array, you can say image.alt, image.url, image sizes large URL or something, and you can just get all of that. And it doesn't matter where that stuff comes from, it all works. Integration allows you to also, like if you're say like a pods or something or some other, you make your own custom MetaBox plugin and you want to do something, to get into there in that process, we have a filter that people can use for that. And it short circuits our entire original lookup, so it doesn't look up the value twice. It takes all the advantage of the WordPress caching things, but it's super flexible for being able to just pluck data out of any structure. You take a repeater that's in a group, and then you want to get, you put a post object in there and you want to get the status off the post object. You can do all that stuff.
Jeez.
All possible. Out of the box. It just works. And then when you go in there to set the keys, it's very user friendly though. It'll enumerate the keys where it can, so it makes a list for you. So you don't have to remember what they all are, but it doesn't just throw every single key there ever was into a big list, which I don't find very... There's a couple plugins I've seen that do that when you're doing these meta integrations. It just gives you every key that's registered, and it's like, that's kind of confusing. What if that key doesn't exist in this post? What if that isn't an ACF thing that I want? I don't know. You know what I mean? But it's a really nice system. And that kind of was... that whole thing, that whole meta lookup system is actually available to people. Like if you're a developer nerd who's hearing this and you're like, man, PHP templates, you can. Because we made a handler for doing all of this stuff. There's REST endpoints for doing it too. So if you want to do those types of lookups in JS, it all works. So there's a lot of really nifty, and see, that's an example of, we wanted to make it really easy for people to just use ACF, just use their post meta. It doesn't matter where it comes from. I know it's this post object that we set as post meta. I just want to get this thing that I know is on the post object. Great. You just do that and it just works. And in the process of doing that, we actually made something really powerful that we then were able to expose for other people to be able to use if they wanted to.
And so you don't give, like, for example, do you offer the functionality of like registering post types, registering custom fields and stuff? Or do you say, hey, there's a solution for that. It's ACF. Everybody loves it. We'll just integrate with that? Or do you guys, like, when do you draw the line and say like, well, we should have our own form. We should have our own custom field UI. We should have our own, so on and so on.
I don't know. I mean, again, that's kind of a little bit more of a bigger picture question. I think Tom is probably the person who'd give you the best answer there. But I think that we want to try to focus on like making tools that output clean things that people can use well. And so it all starts with having this framework, this bedrock of like the styles engine and these other blocks. Now that we have those, I mean, that enables us to more easily do things like, say, like carousels or more interactive components or things like that. But I'm not sure that we would be like looking to get into the forms or the custom UI, or the custom field space or any of that kind of stuff soon. Because it's like you said, there's a lot of good established solutions for that. But it's kind of like for us, like we have a lane that we occupy really well. Like if you want to make markup that's as close to hand coding it yourself as possible and have something that's friendly but works and you can do things fast, that's us. But playing nice with others is another big part of what we do too. So I think we just try to look at it as like, can we properly serve people in the solving the problem that we're trying to solve for them? Mm-hmm. By doing things in this way that doesn't involve making our own version of something. It's kind of like an NPM package, right? Like if you find one that's really good, it's well maintained, it does everything, you don't have to spend 10, 15 hours building it for a client and they're paying you by the hour or something. Well, then sure, you'd be remiss not to use it, right? But if using that thing comes with you have to rewrite your whole API to work with it, and then, well, they update and it's all this stuff, and it's like, well, is it worth it anymore? Maybe not. So maybe then we look at kind of doing our own thing, right? But I think that Tom has a really good radar for that sort of stuff, and over the years people have really developed a strong trust in his intuition for that sort of thing. Like this whole styles object was just an idea he had at one point that he just put together, and I was like, bro, this is fantastic. Mm-hmm. Right? He's got a really good radar for that stuff. So I'm thankful to work with a guy like him to be able to help with these kind of guiding product decisions and that sort of thing. That's really nice.
Yeah, because like page builders sort of are like fashionable or trend, and it sort of becomes like this month's page builder suddenly falls out of fashion, or everybody's mad because this one is not as clean of the markup because now we need cleaner markup. And it's always good criticisms of each page builder. Like this one is, whatever the problem is, it's not performant enough. The code output is not accessible, and it's good. It's nice to see that we demand more from our builders and stuff. But obviously, like you have to have, like you said, like a clear product vision and somebody who understands product, and that's very important, especially in WordPress. But then also, I'm guessing you guys have some sort of like feedback loop with community, or like do you guys do, like how do you stay in touch with the people that are using it to make sure they're happy with it, that they're enjoying
Sure.
what you're building.
Tons of different ways for that. There's obviously like things like the support forums and support tickets that people send in, but then there's also things like the Facebook community. There's just the discussion and discourse that you find on Twitter. And I got to say that I was really happy to join this team originally, because one thing I found when I was looking is like almost all the feedback on this thing is relentlessly positive. You look at GeneratePress and GenerateBlocks feedback, and people just go, yeah, this is really great. And it's something that, they work really hard to make sure the updates are good and all that. And like, that's something that I wanted to be a part of when I saw that, because that's the type of thing that I want with products that I would make. Like if I was making my own product, I would want people to say that sort of thing. And so you don't base maybe everything you do based on just what people ask for, right? But there's certain things that you can see, like when we get these GitHub issues or support threads or whatever, and people, I just want to throw it out there to any of the people who do that stuff, that watch the stuff. You guys are great. By and large, almost everything I read is helpful and useful. Everybody's really cool. And it's really an honor to be able to work on this product for all these people and be able to make something that lets people make other stuff. We're generating tools. Sorry, unavoidable. But yeah, I mean, like that's something that we really care about, because we don't make this for us. Like it's not just for people like me or people like Tom or whatever.
Yeah,
it's bigger than that.
And then the last thing you guys did is the cloud stuff. That's like newer, right? The cloud library. How's that going?
That's pretty sweet. We're going to be, I think, working on some additional new features. Like, I think there's still a discussion on how we're going to do it, but we want to do things to like integrate like the font library and maybe like the global style system a little more with that. So you can just have this like ultimate home base, if you will, for all of your things that you'll be able to just send out everywhere. It's a really neat concept. There's a lot of potential to it that is still yet to come, right? But it's a lot of power, especially if you're a freelancer type person, or somebody like an agency who likes to kind of build from. You have a couple of set site patterns that you like to start people off on, as your boilerplate. This is a great sort of product for that.
Yeah, I'm like super bullish on cloud libraries for WordPress. It feels like the next sort of big, thing that needs to be solved, and it's nice to see people are starting to solve it. I feel like there's been ones in the past, but I think it's taken until we've had like the Gutenberg era to like really solidify just the fact that WordPress now has a consistent approach to markup and styling, and people who use your plugin are going to have a consistent approach to markup and styling. It now makes it so much easier to say like, yeah, we can start like having structural patterns, design libraries, things like that floating around that you can just, like you said, just pull into any site. I think that's going to be probably the big frontier of WordPress, hopefully.
Yeah, definitely. And like with the new font stuff that we were just doing too, I think there's a lot of cloud potential for that as well. That feature, by the way, is freaking so cool.
So what's the new font thing? Because I don't know if I've seen it.
That is a GP premium feature where we have a brand new font library. And it's kind of sort of similar. Like if you look at it, it'll probably look a little bit like the core one in WordPress. It is in many ways based on it, like heavily inspired by it, based on a true story, if you will, right? Yeah. But we did a lot of extra things that the core one doesn't do. Like talking about the whole, this is where we have to color outside the lines kind of situation, right? Like when you're installing Google Fonts from there, it doesn't actually install any variable fonts. Even if the font is a variable font, it forces it to have the like big, chunky, non-optimized, unsubsetted version of those fonts. So all the font files that thing pulls are ginormous. Like in our tests, they're all just way larger than like if you went to Google Fonts and just got them. And so we were like, oh, why is that? And we figured out that was just because of the way that the Google Fonts API works. If you haven't seen it, by the way that WordPress actually, like Gutenberg actually generates those font choices, they have a whole repo package for this where they generate these like inline SVG fallbacks and stuff. It's actually kind of an interesting little mechanism, in general, but it's really neat. Like we basically took a lot of that stuff and then we found ways to optimize it further. We added subsetting mechanisms and these other things so that it's downloading like the fastest and best version of the file. If there's a variable version, it gets it for you automatically. It handles all of that stuff. It generates a CSS variable for you to use. You can choose the fallbacks on the font, all that.
Oh, yeah.
It's really customizable. It's really sweet.
Nice. And I feel like we just like scratched the surface, because I feel like you and I could probably go deep on like one specific thing and talk about how you accomplish and stuff like that, which I think we should do in the future. Overall, where can people go to kind of get more information from you? I mean, you're always sharing kind of like cool stuff. I feel like I'm always learning from you online. So where do you recommend people go to follow you?
Well, probably the best place would be like Blue Sky or Twitter. So that's at Ian Svo in both places. It's like at iansvo.bsky.social or whatever it is over there. And then I have my personal site, which I'm working on revamping so that I can follow your footsteps a little bit more and start writing a bit more on, right? Because I have been woefully neglecting that. So I'm going to be trying to really revamp my my personal blog efforts. And then I have the Learn WP Theme Dev site, which we're also going to be making some updates to. And I think I have some exciting changes on that coming up. So all good things to stay in touch about.
It's awesome, man. Thanks for coming and talking. Hope we'll chat again soon.
Yeah, definitely.
Webmasters is hosted by me, Brian Cords. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to like and subscribe, leave us a review, or share this episode. For more, visit webmasters.fm. Until next time.